today's webinar, you will hear from B2B expert Ruth P. Stevens and Madison Logic CEO Eric Matlick as they discuss how nurturing can quadruple the productivity of lead generation. This webinar is essential for company leaders, account leaders, and strategic sellers who are investigating how nurturing leads in order to drive consumers through the sales funnel is central to their success. Ruth is a guest blogger at hbr.org, Biznology, and an author of 2 business books, Maximizing Lead Generation, The Complete Guide for B2B Marketers, and Trade Show and Event Marketing. She teaches marketing to graduate students at Columbia Business School. Without further ado, Ruth Stevens.
Great. Thank you, Lana. So glad to be here to discuss this really important subject of lead nurturing. And what I'm going to do is cover a bunch of principles and practices that allow lead nurturing to really help drive additional lead results and sales results. But before we dive into lead nurturing per se, I'd like to establish some background material that will allow us to all be on the same page when it comes to lead nurturing. And the reason for this is that there's actually a lot of, may I say, sort of misunderstanding or maybe even to the extent of bad behavior that goes on in the world of lead generation management and tracking. And so I want to start by introducing some concepts that I hope will help everyone get to the lead nurturing stage from a position of strength. So to begin with, I'd like to define what is a lead. And on this slide, I have 3 different viewpoints of the lead process or the lead concept. But I want to make the point that a sales lead is the name and contact information and background information on a prospective buyer. And I say this because there is a lot of sort of wild use of the word lead out there in the world. And what we really want to do as marketers is deliver to our sales forces, whether they're in-house sales teams or third-party channel partners, we want to deliver to them a qualified lead, which I would define as a prospect that is actually ready to take up the time of a salesperson. And the reason for this is that our job as lead generators is to help a sales force be more productive. So we want to offload from them the job of cold calling and the job of finding prospects who have a prayer of buying. So if we're handing anything less than qualified prospects to a sales team, we're not doing that job. We're not helping their productivity. And one of the classic examples of this is by just taking someone who happened to stop by our booth and drop a card in a fishbowl or let us zap their badge, and handing that to a salesperson really doesn't help. So the secret to success in lead generation management and tracking is quality. So the way we get there, of course, is by following a process. And this is where a lot of marketers get bored, and I don't blame them. But truthfully, lead generation is really more about science than it is about art. It's true that the company that understands the step-by-step process of lead generation is going to be the one that has the competitive advantage. And as you see on this chart, lead nurturing is an essential sort of midpoint element to the entire larger lead generation process. So with that, I want to share one additional sort of pre-concept that I think will be helpful. And this is the notion that in business to business, we want to be providing our sales counterparts with a steady stream of qualified leads. But we only want to invest in and deliver the number of leads that they need to meet their quotas or the business objectives that have been set for them. And so it's a good idea in advance of creating a campaign or any other lead generation and management process by calculating the ideal number of leads for each salesperson. This will allow you to avoid waste and also reduce the amount of, sort of maybe dissatisfaction or resentment that might emerge from the sales team if you're not helping them meet their quotas. So let me share the calculations here very quickly. The way this math works, it's pretty simple, is we start with an estimation of how much revenue each rep is expected to deliver for the firm. And I've used a large enterprise type of number here, $3 million, say that each rep is expected to deliver a $3 million quota. And we have to assume, and I think fairly, that a certain percentage of that is always going to be self-generatable by a salesperson. They don't need necessarily marketing help for the entire quota, so let's back out the amount that they can handle on their own, either through their own contacts or calling existing customers or otherwise, nurturing their accounts. And in terms of new prospects, they may need only, in this example, we've said the other 60%. So that's, $1.8 million. So this $1.8 million is what marketing needs to help them with. So to turn that into the number of leads, we just do some division. First, we divide that $1.8 million by the average order size, or revenue per order. And you can get sort of fancy with this, but it's probably a good idea to just pick a number and divide that, so that you end up in this example with 30 closed deals required. So we now know that we need to be delivering enough leads so that they can close 30 deals. And to get at the number of qualified leads, then we divide that deal flow by the conversion rate, which I've seen in business-to-business environments, conversion rates going anywhere from 10% to as high as 40 or even 50%. I've used 20% here as an example. But now we know that our marketing campaigns need to be generating 150 leads per rep in the period. So that will help you plan and figure out exactly what kind of nurturing is required. So let's now dive into the nurturing subject. What I want to do is make a case for why nurturing is essential to business marketing today. And the concept here is that usually an inquiry that we get from a prospect is simply not ready to see a salesperson, but that most inquirers in business environments do eventually buy in the category. They're inquiring because they have an interest and, we hope, a need. So it's important for us to qualify that lead over that interest over time and stay in touch with the prospects who are simply not ready to see a salesperson. So a process known as lead nurturing, sometimes lead incubation or lead development, needs to be put in place to take advantage of this opportunity. And of course, the data behind all this is that, in fact, it has been shown again and again that just about half of inquirers eventually buy in the category. So we need, as marketers, to stay in touch with them until they buy, because if we don't, they're going to buy from the competition, or at least 45% of them. And we also know that sales teams are simply not going to be working an unqualified lead. There, may be exceptions here or there, but this all says to me that our job as marketers is to deliver a stream of qualified leads. When they are not qualified, then we need to introduce a nurturing program. So how does this work? So let's dive in. The business case for lead nurturing is clear, and Aberdeen did a study a couple of years ago that suggested that companies that are best in class as marketers all have, well, most of them have nurturing programs. And in fact, that they're not only 4.5 times more likely to be taking advantage of this nurturing concept compared to the so-called laggard companies, but they're achieving higher revenues, larger order sizes, and getting the 47% larger average order sizes than the comparative laggard companies. I mean, this is pretty persuasive to me. And interestingly, lead nurturing doesn't cost you very much, so it really the case is clear. Here's some support data from an industrial search engine and research company called GlobalSpec that suggests, again, that what we know is that business buyers don't respond, well, they're not going to buy without a series of touches, and that is in effect what lead nurturing is all about, especially when it comes to larger purchases like those in the black bars here in this chart. The larger the purchase, the more likely a series of touches is required. So just to sort of summarize all this with some hypothetical data, think about the campaign that you might have done that generated, say, 100 responses, just to make the numbers look easy, or to analyze the numbers quickly. In any given 100 inquiries from your lead generation campaign, only a handful are likely to be qualified on the spot. So we said 5 here. So that means that 95 of your campaign responders are not ready to be delivered to a salesperson. So what most campaign processes do is they take that lead pool and conduct outbound communications to try to qualify them. And really only a percentage of them are going to be even reachable. We've said here that it was 60%. And then of those that we could reach, only a certain percent will be qualifiable. We've said here it was 20%. So that means that 84 of our 100 original inquirers are just not ready to hand to a salesperson. But if we put them into a nurturing program, we're likely to be able to qualify another 30% of those, which is 25 additional campaign qualified leads, which has, if you just look at the math quickly, you're adding another, several times additional results to the campaign outcome. So not only does your cost per lead reduce dramatically, your campaign productivity is vastly enhanced. So that another way to look at the business case for lead nurturing is about changing buying behavior. And we all know that with the arrival of internet, the way business buyers buy today has changed dramatically. They really don't want to see a salesperson until maybe the last 20 or 30% of their buying process. So that means that we as marketers need to identify them early and stay in touch with them, try to influence them during that, 70% in the front end, so that we can get that relationship deepened, so that when they are ready to buy, we will already have the upper hand. We'll have that relationship in place. So, the original concept of lead nurturing has really evolved in recent years to more of a relationship marketing process, and is obviously supporting the way business buyers buy. Now, at the same time, I would argue, and it looks like there is data that suggests that business marketers still haven't necessarily gotten the lead nurturing concept, or certainly the tactics yet. There's still room for improvement. So with that, I'd like to move into a discussion of some of the best practices. Now, this is only a handful of best practices, and there's a lot of additional work that's available, but I wanted to focus on 3 that I think have high opportunity for leverage. And the first one is about customizing the message and personalizing the message. And this, of course, begins with the initial opportunity to capture data from the inquirer or prospect, meaning on the qualification form itself. So this might be a web-based form, it might be paper-based form, but the point is that if you ask for information about their interests and needs, this becomes a help in not only moving the lead toward qualification, but also giving you insight into how to talk to them throughout the nurturing process. So you then want to customize your communications, landing pages, whatever, so that you are supporting what you've learned from them, what the interests that have been revealed. So I will say that it's essential today, and this is something that we're seeing emerge very rapidly, that marketing automation has become an essential tool in lead management, lead nurturing, lead qualification. There are many suppliers out there with either installed software or cloud-based services that allow us to do this personalization and dynamic decision tree type communications. But it's gotten to the point where without marketing automation, it's really hard to follow best practices in lead qualification and nurturing. Now, the second sort of point of leverage that I would suggest as a best practice is that the communications be conceived and designed to deliver real value. What we're talking about here is really classic content marketing, which is not salesy. You're not at the point where you're trying to push your sales message. Instead, you're trying to establish thought leadership. You're trying to help educate the prospect so that he or she can get the job done, but also see you as a trusted advisor in that process. So we're really talking about content marketing. And so marketers need to develop a deliberate content strategy. So there are lots of ways to do this, but here's a step-by-step process that has worked for me and some of my clients. It says that you want to analyze the buying process stages and determine what content assets you have to apply to various buyer segments across their journey. And where you're missing a useful piece of relevant content, you want to go fill in that gap by developing or acquiring content assets that make sense and will help the prospect move their message or move along their buying process to our advantage. There's an example here that can give you some ideas about how to think about this. The buying process stage can be boiled down to 3 in this example. In some complex environments, it might need to be a lot longer. But as you can see, the kind of need that a prospect has at different stages of the buying process, it evolves, and therefore the kind of material that we're providing needs to be as relevant as possible. So with that, I just add one last best practice, which is about, again, I'm sorry, this is heavily about the science of lead nurturing and not about the big creative ideas, but it's essential that we put in place a process that allows us to track responses, because this is all about moving the prospect along a journey, and we have to stay in touch with them, understand how they've responded, motivate them to respond, and record that response in a database so that the next message can be as relevant and helpful to the prospect as possible. So with that, I've introduced 3 best practices. I've explained the business case for lead nurturing, and I'm going to hand the microphone back to Lana for the next speaker, who Eric is actually going to introduce a very interesting new technology that's available to help the nurturing process be even more effective. So looking forward to hearing him. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Next up is Eric Matlick. Eric Matlick brings over 15 years of experience to his role guiding corporate strategy and vision at Madison Logic. Prior to founding Madison Logic, Eric was the president and founder of Industry Brains, which he sold to Marchex in July of 2005. Eric also founded Media Brains, a reader service and buyer's guide provider to premium publishers, and serves as an ad sales manager for Ziff Davis Publishing. Eric holds a BS in marketing from the Syracuse University School of Management. He is also on the board as advisors of Tint, Smart Device Media, Metamorphic Ventures, and Syracuse University's Newhouse School. Without further ado, Eric Matlick.
Thank you, Lana, and great presentation, Ruth. This is Eric Matlick, CEO of Madison Logic. Today we're going to talk about a few different topics. The typical B2B customer journey. We'll discuss in detail what the journey of your customers look like. We'll look at the decision-making process and how it's different in B2B versus B2C. And the marketing automation market has been receiving a lot of attention lately. We'll talk about the size of the market and the effectiveness of marketing automation. And last but not least, we'll talk about the best practices and client example, including for those of you who are on the call today, we happen to have done an A/B split of what we call instant nurturing. So some of you, about half of you, should have seen some display ads announcing or thanking you for registering for this webinar, and we're going to disclose the results of that to see if it had an impact and lift in attendance today. So for all of you that stick through this, at the end we'll be disclosing the results of the A/B split of instant nurturing. So to get started, we'll talk about the B2B, the buyer journey, and in the consumer world, the buyer, it's a very short sales cycle, and there's really only one decision maker. B2B looks very different. Typically starts off with what we call a discovery phase and the research phase, and then it gets a little more complicated. There are many decision makers and influencers involved in the B2B purchasing process. And then after that, we wind up in an RFP or bid process, and finally an approval process again, which includes many people and eventually a purchase. And what we'll like to talk about today is how this, the difference between B2B and B2C and having all those influencers, and how it's important to do multi-touch and multi-channel approach to marketing. The decision-making process, as we all know, includes things like implementation date, the size and complexity of the company that you're selling to, the length of the contract, but most importantly, we like to look at the number of people and who those people are that are involved in the influence of the purchase. A lot of times, Madison Logic happens to be on the sell side as well. We work with a lot of advertisers who are generating leads, and interestingly enough, a lot of the marketers tend to focus very narrowly on one person or one type of individual by job title. They'll give us an RFP or an IO for reaching vice presidents of technology in certain company sizes, and quite often they leave out the fact that the product that they're selling might actually be an HR product. There might be HR people or a VP of sales that's going to interface with this product, and those are usually not included in the lead gen process, but there definitely are important people in the purchase decision and should be communicated to, perhaps not through initial lead generation, but perhaps through nurturing. So let's talk about nurturing and where our marketers are investing their money. Marketing automation is a hot topic. Alok was acquired at the end of last year. Marketo filed to go public a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot of money being spent on marketing automation. It's close to $1 billion industry right now. It's projected to be $750 million just spent on marketing automation this year. But what I find interesting is that the penetration rates are still very low. Only about 6% of marketers or organizations that do marketing have installed marketing automation. So what that tells us is that this is a large market that is growing rapidly and has a lot of room to grow. So let's look at how we're using marketing automation. There's a bit of a timeline here. Usually a vendor or marketer will give us a white paper, try to generate a new lead, and that's the first action that happens. Then about 14 days later, on average, the lead gets put into marketing automation and the first event happens, and that event is typically an email send. And then Some people, anytime you send out an email to a large group of people, some people will opt out, and then there's usually a second and third event. Every time there's an email, there are some opt-outs, and that's typically how marketing automation is used. It's a multi-touch approach. You're touching your audience multiple times, but it's really only one channel, and that is email. So what we have here is great in the sense that it's multi-touch and that there's massive adoption going on. The issues that we see is that the data is perishable, meaning that if you are sending emails to your users, you're assuming that they're still interested in your product or the particular product that you're trying to sell them. That's based off of data that you gathered when you generated the lead, and that might have been 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months ago. So there is a need and an appetite for smart marketers to update their database and find out what their users are doing, what they're most interested in, so they can tailor their message or product to the right person. The other problem that we see here is it's really just one-dimensional still, and it's not multi-channel. And lastly, and speaking with a lot of marketers, the opt-out rates, because it is email and because it's being used so frequently, we're seeing on average about 20 to 25% of a marketer's database will become opted out over the course of a year or two, which means that you can't communicate with them via email until they opt back in. Let's also look at the discovery phase. We tend to generate leads in the discovery phase and then not communicate, as we saw on the last slide, for that first 14 days. What we decided to do is look at all of the transactions across the Madison Logic network in 2012 and try to see at about 2 million downloads what was happening here. And what we found was that the peak discovery phase, meaning at the time when the user was doing their research and downloading white papers or viewing webinars, was a lot shorter than we had thought. Although the B2B sales cycle is 6, 12, and sometimes 18 months to close a sale, the discovery phase is surprisingly short. Most of this activity happens within the first 4, 5, or 6 days. The discovery period peaks for sure within 10 days, and the average number of downloads that happens is 3 to 5 in that short window. We also took a look at an IBM Cognos study that was attempting to look at the exact same thing and try to figure out that discovery phase and how they could impact conversion rates and open rates. They had a very similar premise to us, and what they found was that if they increased their first response, the first email that went out, from 2 days to 4 hours, the second response from 10 days to 24 hours, the third response from 20 days to just 10 days. So basically, communicating with the prospect 3 times in that first 10 days, which we call the discovery phase, the open rate increased drastically from 12.2% to 33.3%. That's a 100% increase in open rates. And the click-through rates increased even more substantially from 0.09% to 15.5%, which is a 1,600% increase in click-through rates. And they found the same thing, that the lead opportunity virtually died after 10 days. So before we propose a solution, I wanted to take a look at, for all of you that have been in the internet world as long as I have, take a look at what has evolved in the display or banner world since the mid to late 90s to today, and see if there's a correlation between what's happened in the nurturing world and where we think it's going, because nurturing is a little bit newer, and we think there are some ways to draw a comparison here. If you remember the display world back in the mid-90s, it's very simple. An advertiser would approach a media site, meaning media came first, and they would match their product or message or their target audience with the users and audience that would read a particular website. So you would see a golf ad typically on a golf site, and that was about the extent of the targeting in the mid-90s. And then came sort of the evolution of display, where all of a sudden data was being used and acquired by media companies or publishers to better understand their audience and get more granular. And then you had advertisers, instead of targeting entire audiences on a site, you would target really only certain sections of a site or users who have been through certain sections of the site to try to get more granular and topic-oriented. And then more recently, data not only became first, but data sort of bypassed many of the content sites, and advertisers started buying data first, figuring out who their ideal customer is, and then finding those customers, instead of on sites, finding them through exchanges first, and then targeting their ads to wherever their customer might be, not necessarily thinking about what site they're on first. That was sort of an after or second thought. And that's really, sort of the evolution of display advertising and where we are today. We see that lead nurturing today is really in that first phase still. Advertisers have databases of leads that they'd like to speak to or communicate with, and they do that primarily through email. There's very little targeting. They know what they know about the user as how they came into their database, and that's pretty much all they know, and they will send emails to those users. What we're starting to see, a little bit of at least now, are some of the marketers are adding intent data on top of their nurturing. So rather than just sort of spraying and praying and sending out emails to everybody on one topic, they're starting to add intent data so they can be more granular and pick up topics of what people might be interested in the present, and then find those people through email. So they're getting a little more granular with their emails by layering on data. And then what we're not really seeing quite yet, but where we think this will be going soon, is similar to the display world. The data comes first, and it's about finding those users wherever you can find them. And that's what we call multi-channel. We do think that marketers and advertisers will start using RTB and exchanges to not only send emails to these users, but also serve display ads to these users to help nurture them along. And Madison Logic is starting to experiment with this a little bit ourselves, which is exactly how we did this instant nurturing that we'll be announcing in a few minutes. So the top 5 actions, items to implement: multi-channel, communicating not just with email, but communicating with email, display, contextual ads, phone calls, hitting the user in a number of different ways wherever they might be. We think is very important, not just email. Multiple content offerings, keeping your content fresh, always being relevant to them, and using data to figure out what they might be interested in. And implementing nurturing strategy from day one. Don't wait 14 days or 10 days. If the sales cycle the discovery phase is a lot shorter, you need to be in front of those users quickly. And utilizing smart lead scoring via your marketing automation, that's obviously being adopted very quickly right now, and we think that's important as well. So let's take a look at, going back to where we started, looking at the customer journey, and taking a look at how we would implement a lead generation and nurturing campaign simultaneously. The first phase before they hit the discovery is you're doing your lead generation, your top of funnel. You want to generate leads that are targeted towards the audience that you want to sell to. Then you want to layer in immediately instant nurturing or nurturing with banner ads, so that you're in front of that customer, that potential customer, as soon as they download the white paper and they're in the discovery phase, and before you start your email nurturing. You want to nurture with banners, content, marketing automation by day 10, including email as well as banners. Perhaps at the 21-day or so phase, you want to be reaching out to your prospects via telephone calls, and hopefully by the bid process, you're meeting your deadlines and you're included in the bid process, and you can celebrate your closing of the sale. A sample campaign of how this would look for us is, a typical lead generation would be somewhere around 500 leads. An advertiser would come to us and say, we'd like to generate 500 leads over the next quarter. It might cost roughly $20,000 to do that. That's a little bit on the low end, depending on the vertical. It could cost $20,000. The nice thing is that instant nurturing, it's not a lot of impressions. If you only have 500 prospects that you've generated from direct leads, and you want to reach each one of those prospects 10 times, it's only 5,000 impressions to serve display ads to those 500 people. And we would typically include that in a purchase for a customer. The next phase is influencer targeting. Who are the other people in the company that would be involved in the purchasing process? Again, Madison Logic has a lot of intent data. We do a lot of lead generation. We have a lot of data on our servers. We can actually find who the influencers are at the company that you're trying to reach, and we can serve display ads to those influencers. And to give you an idea, just to reach, let's say, 5,000 influencers, which is roughly 10 for every one lead that you generate, it's only about $1,500. And then we layer in a lookalike campaign as well sometimes, so you can reach not just the companies that you generated leads from, but other companies that look like that, or other companies that might be interested in your product. Again, very low cost. Considering you're spending $20,000 on leads, you certainly want to do instant nurturing and influencer targeting to make those leads convert at a higher ratio. So the instant nurturing test that we did today, our hypothesis was that we would see more, if we took the registrants that registered for this webinar and we did an A/B split, that we would see a higher percentage show up today on this call. And so the methodology is we split the groups into the registrant pool into two equal groups. And one group, we just did standard email reminders to nurture them. And the other group, we did email reminders plus display ads or instant nurturing. And we recorded the total number of registrants for each group. And here are the results. So these are the banner ads that we did that you probably saw if you were in the B group. And you may have seen this on some of the sites that you went to. Could have been on really any site that you went to. You may have seen these banner ads show up. And here are the results for instant nurturing the A/B split. For Group A, which just received email reminders, the attendance rate today was 23%. And for Group B, which received email reminders plus instant nurturing, the attendance rate was 31%, which is great news, which means that the Group B that received instant nurturing had a higher yield of about 30.4% lift in attendance versus the Group A. So that concludes today's session. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I'm going to hand it back over to Lana now. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Ruth P. Stevens and Eric Matlick for providing this webinar. And I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for participating. Please feel free to share this webinar with your colleagues and contact the presenters if you have further questions.